My stepmother raised her champagne glass and said it loud enough for the room to hear, "You were never family." 50 people, dressed in gold and glass, watched as she laid out forged papers across the dining table like a queen discarding pawns. "Your father's will was clear. Everything goes to my son." Her voice sliced cleaner than the crystal in her hand. I was 24. I stood there in a thrifted velvet dress clutching my father's vinyl like it was a sword, while Diane carved his memory from the air as if I was never his daughter. But what gutted me more than her betrayal was the woman beside her. Tara, my childhood best friend, the girl who once sang Dad's protest songs with me under blanket forts. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, just laughed beside Diane like I was a ghost trying to claw back into the story. They thought they erased me. They didn't know I came armed with the truth. The chandeliers sparkled above their heads. But what shattered next wasn't glass. If your chest already aches for her, don't hesitate to leave a comment. I feel this. Funny how one lie at a dinner table can crack open the truth they tried to bury. 3 weeks earlier, I'm Lena Harper, and most nights you'll find me behind the bar at the Rusty Note, a dive on the east side of Austin where the neon buzz never quite matches the rhythm of the guitars on stage. The counter is sticky no matter how many times I wipe it. The jukebox wheezes between songs, and the air smells of hops and spilled whiskey. I pour craft beers like I've done it my whole life, sliding pint glasses across the scarred wood to customers who barely glance up from their phones. But in those rare, quiet moments, I catch myself staring at the corner stage, where amps glow and the strings of someone's guitar tremble with the weight of a half-finished song. By day, well, not really day, since my hours blur into the night, I study music journalism online, hunched over a laptop in my one-bedroom apartment where shelves of my father's old vinyls keep me company. He was a folk singer who once set small-town stages alight with protest songs. His voice was raw, cracked by truth, and though he's been gone 5 years, his music is the anchor I cling to when everything else feels unsteady. Those vinyls spin in my head even when the bar drowns me in chatter and clinking glasses. They remind me there was a time when words mattered, when someone believed in fighting for more than survival. The regulars at the Rusty Note know me as the quiet bartender with an ear for good riffs, but to me, it's just a stage I've been stuck on too long. Sometimes when I lean against the counter and watch the open mic kids strum through Borrowed Courage, I wonder what it would feel like to be the one with something worth saying. That thought terrifies me as much as it thrills me. Caleb Monroe is the reason it doesn't die out completely. He's the guitarist who always lingers after gigs, not in the arrogant way most musicians do, but with a softness that feels dangerous. His hazel eyes catch the light like bottled honey, and when the crowd clears, he'll wander up to the bar, case slung over his shoulder, and ask me about things no one else bothers to. "Your dad's songs had fire? Ever try writing like that?" he asked once, leaning against the counter as though he had nowhere else he needed to be. I laughed, though it came out thin. "Yeah, that's why I'm studying journalism, to give voice to people like him." He smiled at me in a way that made my chest tighten, like he was seeing something I'd kept hidden. His questions stir hope I've tried to bury because dreams are heavy things when you've been told over and over they don't belong to you. When my father died, I thought grief was the sharpest pain I'd ever feel. But then Diane happened. My stepmother, Diane Whitmore, with her manicured hands and marble smile, swept in like she owned not just his house, but his memory too. She's a real estate tycoon who builds glass mansions in the hills while tearing down anything she considers beneath her. I was beneath her. I was 19 when she first told me I was too small for Harper blood, and after Dad's funeral she cut me off completely. Along with her son Nate, the golden boy, all smirks and designer suits, they made sure I disappeared. No inheritance, no seat at the table, not even a phone call. It's been 5 years, and still I can't stop wondering. Why? Why erase me so completely, as if I never existed in their world? Most nights I don't talk about it. I let the bar noise cover the silence inside me. But sometimes, when Caleb stays late, I let pieces slip. Like the way Diane's voice used to rise sharp as glass whenever she said my name, or how Nate looked through me at the funeral like I was already a ghost. Caleb listens without judgment, and for a moment I believe someone might see me again. Tonight, after his set, he pulled up a stool across from me, guitar balanced on his knee. The crowd had dwindled, and neon lights hummed against the walls like restless bees. He plucked a single chord, one that lodged itself deep in my chest because I recognized it instantly. My father's song, the one about freedom, about voices too loud to be silenced. The sound cracked me open in ways I didn't expect. For a moment, I wasn't a bartender wiping rings of beer from the counter. I was a daughter remembering the way my father's voice carried through smoke-filled rooms, reminding people to stand tall. Caleb's fingers moved like he'd known the song all his life, but when he met my gaze, it was clear he'd only known it through me. "You ever think about writing like him?" he asked again, softer this time. I swallowed hard, blinking away the sting in my eyes. "All the time. But it's not that simple, Caleb. Not when the people who should have been my family pretend I don't exist." The silence between us hummed heavier than the neon lights. I thought of Diane's empire of glass and steel, of Nate's smirk when he called me invisible, and of the way my father's voice still echoes though his body is gone. Dad's protest songs keep me going, but why did Diane and Nate erase me? I don't have the answer yet. But as Caleb strummed the last note, letting it fade into the smoke-filled air, I knew one thing. Whatever Diane tried to bury, it wasn't going to stay hidden forever. The rusty note had thinned out for the night, leaving behind the smell of beer-soaked wood and the faint hum of an amp someone forgot to turn off. I wiped the counter in small circles, letting my body go through the motions while my head was still caught in the echo of my dad's song Caleb had played earlier. The chord was still vibrating in me like it had nowhere else to go. Caleb lingered in his usual way, his guitar case leaning against the booth, his shoulders slouched like the night wasn't ready to let him go home yet. "Lena," he said, his voice low enough that I almost didn't hear it over the jukebox's whine. "There's something I want to ask you." I looked up, cautious but curious. His eyes, those warm hazel eyes, held something more serious than the usual easy banter. "My band's playing at a charity gala next week," he continued, sliding onto the stool across from me. "It's at Diane's place, the Hill Country Mansion. It's a big deal. There'll be producers, investors, people who could actually open doors for you." The word hit me hard. Diane. The name curled in my stomach like a hook. My hand froze on the rag, still pressed to the counter. He noticed the shift in me instantly. I know, he said quickly, but hear me out. You'd get a chance to reconnect, and, Lena, your voice deserves to be heard." My throat tightened. "You don't know Diane," I muttered. "She'll shred me, just like she always does." He leaned forward, elbows on the counter, refusing to let me retreat. "Then let her try. You're stronger now. And what's she gonna do? Pretend you don't exist in front of the entire Austin elite? People are watching her too, you know." I laughed, though it came out bitter. "She spent 5 years pretending I don't exist. She's a professional at it." But Caleb didn't flinch. He just looked at me like he could already see the woman I wanted to be, not the bartender wiping beer rings at midnight. His words pressed against the walls I'd built around myself, words my heart wasn't ready for but desperately wanted. "Your voice deserves to be heard." I thought about the mansion. I hadn't set foot in it since my father's funeral. I could still see the way Diane towered in the marble foyer that day, her black dress like armor, her eyes cold as she informed me there would be no inheritance, no place for me in that house. Nate had stood beside her, smirking like he was already the crowned heir. Walking back into that fortress felt like walking barefoot through glass. "Diane's world is a minefield," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "Can I really step into it?" He didn't rush me. He just let the silence hang, heavy but patient. Outside, through the cracked blinds, the Austin night spread out in stars and streetlights. The city looked alive, restless, like it was waiting for something to happen. Maybe waiting for me. I sank onto the stool across from him, pressing my palms flat against the counter, as though I needed to anchor myself. Why would she even want me there? After years of silence, suddenly she wants me to walk into her palace and play guest of honor? Doesn't that sound like a setup to you? Caleb tilted his head, a half-smile tugging at his lips. Maybe. Or maybe she knows she can't erase you forever. And maybe you're exactly what she doesn't want showing up, which makes me think you should. His certainty scared me as much as it inspired me. I searched his face for doubt, for hesitation, but he only looked steady. Like he'd already decided I belonged in a world I'd been banished from. The jukebox sputtered out, and the silence that followed was so complete I could hear the fizz of the beer tap behind me. My chest ached with all the questions I couldn't ask. What if Diane humiliated me in front of everyone? What if Nate cut me down with that smirk? What if the whole city learned I was still the invisible Harper? But then I heard my father's voice in the back of my head. Not words this time, but the way his guitar always rose against the noise, stubborn and unbroken. Maybe I owed it to him. Maybe I owed it to myself. I looked at Caleb, at the stubborn hope in his eyes. "If I go," I said slowly, "I'm not promising anything. I'm not promising to smile or to pretend Diane didn't ruin me." "Good," he said, smiling now. "I wouldn't want you to pretend. I just want you there. The rest will take care of itself." I shook my head, a nervous laugh breaking free. "You're too optimistic, you know that?" "Maybe," he admitted, "or maybe I just see something you don't yet." The conversation drifted after that, but I couldn't shake the weight of it. The idea of walking into Diane's fortress left my chest tight, my breath short. Yet Caleb's words clung to me, whispering louder than my fear, "Your voice deserves to be heard." When I finally locked up the bar, the neon buzzing went dark, and the night air wrapped me in its cool embrace. I stood in the parking lot under the Austin sky, staring at the constellations I'd traced since I was a kid. They hadn't changed. The world was still turning. Maybe I was the one who needed to move, so I said it out loud, just to hear how it sounded. "I'll go." The words slipped into the night like a vow. The night after Caleb's invitation, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, watching shadows from the street lamps crawl across the cracked paint. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw Diane's face, sharp cheekbones, sharper tongue, waiting for me at the end of some long marble hallway. My chest felt tight, like I was suffocating under memories I couldn't shake. And then it hit me like a cold wave. I was back at Dad's funeral. The church was dim, filled with the suffocating scent of lilies. The organ's low hum blended with the scrape of shoes on polished floor. I remember clutching the paper I'd written, hands trembling, voice shaking but determined to speak. I wanted everyone to know who he really was, a man who believed that songs could stir the soul, who lived and died with a guitar in his lap. My throat burned with grief, but I kept going, because silence would have betrayed him more than tears ever could. When I stepped down from the podium, Diane's heels echoed behind me. She leaned in close, her perfume sharp, almost medicinal. Her lips barely parted as she hissed, "Childish scribbles. You call that writing?" I froze. The words cut deeper than the loss itself. Nate stood just behind her, smirking like the insult was entertainment. Heat rushed through me. My face burned as I shoved the folded paper into my coat pocket, praying no one else had heard. I wasn't just dismissed, I was erased. That memory stalked me all night, and by the time the sun lit up the blinds in my apartment, panic was pressing on my chest, like a weight I couldn't throw off. I needed air. I needed someone who reminded me I wasn't crazy for wanting more. So I called Mia. We met at a food truck park off South Congress, where string lights swung overhead like tiny stars tethered to wire. The air buzzed with conversation, the smell of frying tortillas, grilled onions, and fresh cilantro thick enough to cling to my clothes. I spotted her leaning against a wooden picnic table, boots scuffed, hair pulled into a messy bun with a velvet scrunchie that clashed perfectly with her thrifted jacket. Mia grinned when she saw me, sliding a paper plate of tacos my way. "You look like you haven't slept in days. Spill." I sank onto the bench, the plate forgotten as my throat tightened. She called my writing childish scribbles at Dad's funeral. Mia's hand froze mid-bite, her eyes sparking with fire. She said that? At his funeral? I nodded, cheeks heating even though years had passed. Saying it out loud made me feel small all over again, like I was still standing in that church, powerless. Mia slammed her taco down, grease splattering onto the table. "Forget her, Lena. You're a badass. You've got more grit than anyone I know. Diane, she's polished glass, shiny on the outside, but fragile as hell. You're solid. You don't break." Her conviction washed over me like armor I didn't know I had. For a moment, I almost believed her. Then she dug into her oversized tote bag and pulled out a swath of emerald fabric. She shook it out with a triumphant grin. "And this? This is your armor." It was a velvet dress, vintage, the kind of find you only stumble on once in a lifetime. The fabric shimmered beneath the string lights, deep green catching the glow and holding it like it belonged there. I brushed my fingers across it. The softness was almost shocking, like it had been waiting for me. For a second, I could imagine stepping into Diane's world not as the forgotten stepdaughter, but as someone impossible to overlook. "I can't take this," I whispered, shaking my head. "Yes, you can. And you will." Mia's eyes glinted with mischief. "You're going to walk in there looking like every song your dad ever wrote just came alive." Her certainty made me laugh, the sound catching me off guard in the middle of my storm. For one fleeting second, I could see it too. Then my phone buzzed. The name flashing across the screen made my stomach drop. Tara. I stared at it, the world tilting. Tara Collins, my childhood friend. The girl I used to trade secrets with under blanket forts, the one who made mixtapes with me in middle school. We hadn't been close in years, not since she'd slipped into Diane's orbit, becoming her assistant, her shadow. Every time her name appeared, it felt like touching a wound that hadn't healed. I answered anyway. "Tara?" Her voice was low, urgent, carrying a tremor I hadn't heard before. "Lena, listen. Don't think this gala is about reconnecting. Diane's got an agenda." My heart stumbled. "What do you mean?" "I can't say more," she whispered quickly. "Just be careful." Before I could press her, the line went dead. I stared at the screen, pulse racing. The tacos had gone cold, the velvet dress heavy in my lap. My chest tightened like the air itself had thickened. Mia leaned in, eyes narrowing. What was that about? I forced a shrug, trying to steady my voice. Nothing, just Tara being Tara. But the truth was a knot pulling tighter in my stomach. Diane's sneer from the funeral, Tara's warning, Caleb's hopeful eyes, it all twisted together until I couldn't tell if I was walking into a chance or a trap. Later that night, back in my apartment, I dropped the dress onto the back of my chair. The room was dim, cluttered with books and papers scattered across my desk. I sat staring at them, at the half-finished assignments, at the glow of my laptop screen. Words should have comforted me. They were supposed to be my weapon, my way through. But all I could hear was Diane's voice hissing, childish scribbles. I rubbed my temples, the hum of Austin traffic drifting in through the cracked window. Mia's encouragement still echoed in my ears, warm and defiant, but Tara's voice lingered longer, heavier. Diane's scribbles jab still stings. How do I face her again? I didn't have the answer. But I knew one thing. The gala was coming, whether I was ready or not. By the time Saturday came around, Mia had officially taken command of my apartment like it was her personal studio. She barged in carrying a duffel stuffed with curling irons, makeup brushes, and a pile of thrift store treasures she'd been hoarding for the right occasion. My living room, normally just a jumble of vinyls, coffee mugs, and notes from my online classes, transformed into a chaotic dressing room. Velvet hangers dangled from the back of my kitchen chairs, shoes lined up like soldiers across the carpet, and in the corner, my old record player spun one of Dad's folk albums, the scratchy sound filling the silence between Mia's instructions. "Chin up," she said, adjusting the strap of the emerald velvet dress on my shoulder. "You're not walking into a firing squad, you're walking into a gala." I scoffed, though the laugh got stuck somewhere in my throat. Feels like the same thing. The dress clung in ways that made me feel exposed, yet under the glow of my crooked floor lamp, it shimmered as though it had been cut from the night sky itself. Mia circled me, tucking, pinning, then stepping back to admire her work. The cracked mirror against the wall reflected a woman I hardly recognized. Still me, but sharper, steadier, almost like someone who belonged in Diane's glittering world. "Rule number 1, Mia announced, clipping one of her thrifted earrings onto my ear. "Don't let the rich folk rattle you. They talk about stocks and ski trips like it's gospel. Smile, nod, and then secretly imagine them tripping over their own egos." She winked. "Makes it way more fun." Her humor was like a lifeline, tugging me back from the edge of panic. I swallowed, trying to ignore the burn in my chest. What if Diane humiliates me in front of everyone? What if I fall flat on my face? "Then you stand back up," she said without hesitation, smoothing the hem of the dress. "Preferably with a clever comeback. Trust me, Lena, they only win if you play by their rules, so don't." Her words landed heavier than she realized. I wanted to believe them, but Diane's voice from years ago still gnawed at me. Childish scribbles. The memory wrapped around me like barbed wire, and no amount of velvet or eyeliner could make it disappear. Just then, my phone buzzed on the desk. I reached for it, hands shaking more than I cared to admit. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't expected. Tara. The text was short, blunt. "Check Dad's old stuff." I frowned, rereading it 3 times. The words were vague, but my pulse spiked anyway. I set the phone down, almost afraid to touch it again. My eyes drifted to the shelves lined with Dad's vinyls. They'd always been my comfort. Sturdy, worn, smelling faintly of dust and old paper. But tonight, with Tara's message echoing in my mind, they felt like a locked door waiting to be opened. I crossed the room, my heels clicking softly against the wood floor. My fingers traced the spines until they stopped on a cardboard box wedged behind the records. I tugged it free, dust clouding the air, catching in the lamplight. Inside, buried under lyric sheets scrawled in Dad's messy handwriting and faded concert flyers, was a sealed envelope. My breath caught the moment I saw his script on the front, my name written with the same looping letters he used to leave on sticky notes by the fridge. I broke the seal with trembling hands. The letter inside was brief, but one phrase seared itself into my mind: hidden assets. I blinked at the words, my pulse hammering. Hidden assets? A trust? A secret he'd never spoken about? Questions tangled in my chest until I could hardly breathe. Why had he kept this from me? Or had he planned to tell me before Diane cut everything short? I folded the letter back quickly, too nervous to keep reading. It felt dangerous, like holding a live wire. I pressed it to my chest, trying to steady my breathing. Mia's reflection appeared beside mine in the mirror. She didn't ask what I'd found. Instead, her gaze fell on the vinyl I'd pulled from the box in desperation, one of Dad's old protest songs. I slid it carefully from its sleeve, running my fingers over the grooves as if they might still carry his voice. The vinyl was cool, solid, unchanging, even while everything around me spun out of control. I clutched it the way I used to clutch his hand as a child, small and certain that if I held on tight enough, I couldn't be lost. "You okay?" Mia asked softly. I nodded, though my throat tightened. "It's just, sometimes I feel like the fire he carried is too heavy. What if it burns me out?" Her hand rested lightly on my shoulder, grounding me. "It won't," she said. Her voice was steady, sure. "You carry your dad's fire, Lena. Fire like that doesn't destroy. It lights the path. You just have to trust yourself enough to follow it." Her conviction sank into me, warming the places Diane's words had frozen years ago. I looked back at the mirror, at the girl in the emerald dress clutching a vinyl like a shield. And for the first time, I didn't just see someone Diane erased. I saw someone who might finally have the courage to step back into that fortress and face her. Outside, through the cracked window, the Austin skyline blinked with neon, restless and alive. Tomorrow night, I would walk into Diane's mansion. And though fear pressed at the edges of my mind, I knew I wouldn't walk in empty-handed. But still, the words from the envelope whispered in the back of my head, refusing to fade. Hidden assets. What exactly had my father been keeping from Diane? The question followed me long after Mia packed up her brushes and zipped her bag, lingering like smoke in the air. The night of the gala came like a tide I couldn't hold back. Caleb pulled up in front of my apartment in a borrowed Mustang, the kind of car that roared with confidence. Its cherry red paint gleamed under the streetlight, and when I slid into the passenger seat, the leather was cold against my skin, smelling faintly of polish and gasoline. Caleb grinned at me, tapping the steering wheel in rhythm with some tune only he could hear. He looked at ease, like this was just another gig, another stage. For me, every mile we drove felt heavier, a drumbeat carrying me toward a place where I didn't belong. We left the hum of Austin behind, its neon glow shrinking in the rearview mirror, until all that was left were the hills, dark, quiet, endless under a sky salted with stars. The road twisted through the moonlit ridges, and every curve made my stomach tighten. Caleb hummed softly, strumming his fingers against the dashboard, trying to fill the silence that pressed in too thick. "You good?" he asked, his eyes flicking toward me as the headlights carved the road ahead. I smoothed the emerald velvet dress over my lap, every wrinkle screaming under my fingertips. "This place isn't my world," I whispered, barely audible. His hand reached across the console, steady, warm. Maybe it should be. I wanted to believe him. I wanted his faith to seep into me, to patch the cracks Diane had carved years ago. But in my chest, fear coiled tighter. My fingers brushed the corner of the vinyl in my bag, Dad's protest song. I carried it like a shield, a reminder that at least one part of me couldn't be erased. Then the mansion rose before us. It didn't just sit on the hill, it commanded it. Glass walls caught the moonlight, shining like a fortress of mirrors, every panel reflecting stars back at the night sky. Marble fountains arced water high into the air, the spray glittering like diamonds before crashing into perfectly carved basins. From the rooftop, a pool glowed like molten silver, casting ripples of light across the sleek walls. Valets in black suits hurried forward, guiding cars smoother and more expensive than anything I'd ever touched. The Mustangs shuddered into the line of vehicles, out of place among the Bentleys and Aston Martins. I felt the difference immediately. When I stepped out, the night air smelled of roses and expensive perfume, sharp against the faint tang of chlorine drifting from the pool. The clink of champagne glasses mingled with low, polished laughter. Guests turned, suits tailored to perfection, gowns stitched with jewels that caught the light like fire. Their gazes slid over me, pausing, polite, but assessing. I could feel their eyes linger on the velvet dress Mia had pressed into my hands, thrifted and altered, brave but undeniably humble. Suddenly, I wasn't Lena Harper, daughter of a folk singer. I was an intruder wearing someone else's world like a costume. My throat tightened. I shifted closer to Caleb, trying to ground myself in the press of his hand against mine. "You belong here," he murmured, steady. "Forget them." But as we moved deeper into the mansion, the marble underfoot slick and echoing, the illusion I was trying to cling to cracked wide open. That's when I saw her, Tara. She stood on the grand staircase beside Diane, her dark hair swept into a glossy knot, her dress sleek and effortless. Diane glowed beside her, all diamonds and control, her smile sharp enough to slice glass. They leaned toward each other, laughing, their voices threading together like conspirators. For a heartbeat, I waited for Tara to glance my way, to share some flicker of recognition, a ghost of the girl who used to ride bikes with me until sunset, who once knew every word to Dad's songs. But when her gaze passed over me, it was empty. She didn't flinch, didn't nod, didn't even hesitate. To Tara, in that moment, I wasn't Lena. I was no one. Her warning from days ago, "Diane's got an agenda," echoed cruelly in my head. Had she meant it? Or was it just bait, one last tether to pull me into Diane's grip? My stomach dropped. Diane's hand settled on Tara's shoulder like claiming property. Tara leaned in, laughing, and the sight hollowed me. Tara was my friend. How could she turn on me like this? The chandeliers above blurred, their crystals scattering light that felt more like judgment than beauty. The walls glistened with gold accents, mirrors reflecting back a version of me I hated. Small, unwelcome, painfully exposed. My thrift store dress clung to me like it knew I didn't belong, and all around me the sound of refined voices hummed like a chorus I couldn't join. Caleb's hand tightened on mine again. "Hey, you okay?" I forced my lips into something that resembled a smile, though my chest burned. "Yeah, just trying to breathe." Inside, the string quartet played, their bows slicing across strings with precision so sharp it felt unnatural. Conversations floated through the air. Stocks, vacations, charity deals whispered like secrets that built empires. Perfume layered so thick it was almost suffocating. My pulse quickened, the sound roaring in my ears louder than the music. But no matter where I looked, my eyes kept drifting back to that staircase, to Tara standing with Diane, as if she belonged in her world, as if I never existed in hers. I clutched my bag tighter, my fingers pressing into the vinyl's edge until it dug into my palm. Diane had her fortress. Tara had chosen her side, and I was standing in the middle of their stage, already playing the role they'd written for me. The outsider, The ballroom was alive with a kind of glittering menace, a symphony of crystal, perfume, and rehearsed laughter. Chandeliers spilled light across polished marble, each facet catching on sequins and silk gowns, reflecting a world that seemed built to remind me how small I was in it. A string quartet played in the corner, every note crisp and practiced, filling the air with elegance that felt more like a cage than a song. Beyond the glass walls, the Austin skyline winked in the distance, so close, yet so far from where I stood now. I clung to Caleb's arm, his steady presence the only thing anchoring me as we drifted through the crowd. Every turn of a head, every raised brow cut deeper. I could hear them, whispers curling through champagne bubbles like smoke. Is that her? The bartender? Cute dress? Thrift, isn't it? Does she really think she belongs here? Each murmur hit like a pebble to glass, small but relentless. Then, like a lightning bolt in the suffocating air, a voice broke through. Lena Harper, right? The infamous mystery girl Caleb keeps writing songs about. I turned, startled, to see a petite woman with wild curls and a grin too mischievous for this sterile room. She balanced a champagne flute on the end of a drumstick, an actual drumstick she'd somehow smuggled into this black tie gala. "Zoe," Caleb said, relief flashing across his face. "My drummer." She gave me a theatrical bow before catching the glass just before it toppled. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else. Don't be nervous. These fancy pants folks, they clap offbeat, totally harmless." I laughed before I could stop myself, the sound almost shocking in my own ears. Something loosened in me, the knot of dread easing just a little. Zoe leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Tell you what, if it gets unbearable, we'll sneak out and roast their overpriced shoes." I grinned, holding onto her humor like oxygen. She was reckless, refreshing, and in that moment, exactly the ally I didn't know I needed. But then the temperature of the room shifted. Diane's shadow stretched across the marble floor, her presence slicing through the chatter. "Lena," she said smoothly, her voice a practiced blade, "there's someone I'd like you to meet." She guided me with a touch that felt like control disguised as grace, steering me toward a tall woman in a sleek black gown, Elena Rossi. Her name rippled through the air, whispered with reverence, a music producer with power in her fingertips, the kind of person who could launch or bury careers with a single decision. Her gaze landed on me, warm and disarming. "I've heard about your portfolio," Elena said, her voice low, steady. "Your writing has edge, raw but compelling." For a heartbeat, my chest filled with something close to pride. My cheeks heated, my pulse quickened. Finally, someone saw me. But then I noticed it. The way her body tilted toward Diane, the subtle pull of allegiance in her stance. "Thanks," I managed, the word catching in my throat. "But I'm just a bartender." Her smile widened, polished and unreadable. "Maybe for now." Encouragement or dismissal? I couldn't tell. The ambiguity gnawed at me, sinking its teeth into my fragile confidence. Was she an opening door or another lock Diane had fastened shut? Before I could decide, Nate slid into view. His glass dangled lazily between his fingers, his smirk gleaming as if it had been crafted to match his cufflinks. "Cute," he drawled, eyes skimming over me like I was a curiosity at auction. "Pouring beers by night, scribbling notes by day. You must be so proud." Laughter rippled from a small circle nearby, sharp as broken glass. Heat surged up my throat. My fists curled at my sides, nails digging crescents into my palms. Every instinct screamed at me to fight, to throw his arrogance back in his face. Instead, I forced myself to meet his gaze, steady. "At least I work for what I have." For just a second, his smirk faltered. But then it returned, lazy as ever, as if my defiance was little more than background noise. Around us, whispers sharpened, hippie vibe, out of her depth, charity case. And then, colder than all of it, I felt Tara's eyes. She stood across the ballroom, a vision of poise and perfection in Diane's orbit. Our eyes met, and in that split second, I searched for her, the girl who used to make mixtapes with me, who once knew all the words to Dad's songs. But there was nothing. No flicker, no warmth, just frost. Her earlier warning echoed in my head. Diane's got an agenda. Had that been real? Or just a lure to keep me off balance? Is Tara really Diane's pawn, or is there more to this? The question coiled inside me, a venom I couldn't spit out. The music swelled, violins trembling under the chandeliers. Perfume thickened in the air, mingling with the metallic scent of champagne. Laughter rose too sharp, too rehearsed, bouncing off the glass walls until it felt suffocating. My pulse raced, drowning out everything but the gnawing sense that every smile in this room was a mask, every word a test. Then Zoe reappeared at my side, bumping my elbow with that same mischievous grin. "Relax," she whispered. "Half of these people probably Googled what to say at a gala 10 minutes before they got here. You're already more interesting than all of them." The laugh that escaped me was shaky, but real. Her humor tethered me back to myself, if only for a moment. Still, as Diane's voice rang out like a bell and Tara's cold gaze lingered on me, I realized this wasn't just a glittering event. It was a battlefield disguised in silk and crystal, where allies and enemies wore the same polished smiles. And the most terrifying part? I couldn't yet tell who was truly on my side. The announcement for dinner rippled through the ballroom like a command, not an invitation. A string quartet shifted from their lilting background melodies into something more formal, their bows dragging across strings in unison, as if to usher us into Diane's domain. Valets appeared, guiding guests toward the dining room with white-gloved precision. Every movement seemed choreographed, like I was walking onto a stage where everyone else knew the script but me. The dining room stretched out in opulence, overwhelming in its detail. A long oak table gleamed under the soft glow of chandeliers, the surface polished so smooth it reflected the candlelight like liquid gold. Crystal glasses sparkled at every place setting, their rims catching tiny bursts of flame, as though even the light bent to Diane's control. Outside the towering glass windows, the Austin Hills rolled beneath the last trace of twilight, deep indigo with streaks of fiery orange lingering on the horizon. It should have been peaceful, grounding even, but inside the air carried only the scent of power, perfume sharp as alcohol, roasted meat, truffle oil, and something faintly metallic from the polished silverware. A server pulled out a chair for me directly across from Diane. Of course, I sank into the seat, the velvet of my dress brushing against the carved wood, and tried to keep my hands still in my lap. Diane's smile greeted me like a sharpened blade, too perfect, too deliberate. She was already poised for the kill. Caleb sat at my right, his presence a steady warmth I clung to like a lifeline. Elena Rossi, elegant in a black gown, occupied the seat beside Diane, her posture impeccable, her gaze unreadable. To Diane's other side, Nate lounged with a champagne flute dangling lazily in his hand, his smirk already set in place like a polished accessory. The low murmur of conversation rose around me, the clinking of glasses and hushed laughter creating an atmosphere that was meant to feel refined. But beneath it, I felt the thrum of anticipation, the quiet edge of people waiting for entertainment. "So," Diane began, her voice cutting easily through the chatter, smooth as silk but honed with steel. Her eyes locked onto mine, sharp and unrelenting. "Still chasing your father's failed dreams, Lena?" The words hit harder than I expected, slicing open a wound I thought I'd covered. My breath caught in my throat. I could sense the subtle shift around the table. Forks paused, glasses hovered midair. They were all waiting for my response, as though Diane had just cracked the first whip and the show had begun. I forced myself to inhale, to keep my chin up. "They're my dreams, Diane, not his, mine." Her smile widened, cruel amusement lighting her face. Of course, though from what I hear, bartending leaves very little time for dreams. Heat crept up my neck, burning its way into my cheeks. My fingers tightened around the stem of my champagne glass until my knuckles turned white. The air around me pressed in, heavy with judgment. Nate's chuckle filled the space like poison. He leaned back, tilting his glass. "Journalism, huh? Isn't that just blogging with better grammar?" Laughter followed, sharp and stinging, each chuckle like a lash across my skin. My chest tightened, shame crawling over me, until I wanted to shrink into the velvet of my chair. But I forced myself to sit taller, even as my heart hammered. Caleb leaned forward, his voice low but firm, steadying me with its certainty. "She's more talented than any of you give her credit for." For a second, the warmth of his defense steadied me. But across the table, Diane's smirk only deepened. She swirled the golden liquid in her glass, the sound of it whispering like mock applause. I raised my own glass, desperate for something, anything, to anchor me. My hand trembled, and a drop of champagne slipped over the rim, landing on the white linen tablecloth with a muted splash. Diane's laugh rang out, bright and cruel. "Be careful, Lena! That spill probably costs more than your rent." The room erupted with chuckles, sharper this time, emboldened by her cruelty. My face burned as I grabbed my napkin, dabbing at the single drop that seemed to expand like a stain of humiliation across the pristine cloth. My hands shook so badly the napkin crumpled in my grip. Inside, a voice screamed at me, "Don't let her see you break. Don't let her win." I lowered the glass carefully, setting it down with deliberate precision. My throat felt tight, as though the laughter itself was choking me. Then I felt it. Elena's eyes. She hadn't joined in. She hadn't laughed. She hadn't even blinked. She simply watched me, her gaze calm, unreadable, but too steady. It was as if she were memorizing me, filing away every reaction for some future moment. Her silence was heavier than the laughter around me, unsettling in a way Diane's open cruelty wasn't. At least with Diane, I knew where the knife was coming from. Elena's stare felt like a hand hovering just above my shoulder, waiting to push when I least expected. Diane's tearing me down, and Elena's watching like a hawk. What's her deal? The thought pulsed through me, unshakable. I shifted in my seat, forcing a breath into my lungs, trying to mask the tremor in my chest. Caleb's hand brushed mine under the table, grounding me again, reminding me I wasn't completely alone. But even with his touch, the storm inside me wouldn't quiet. Every glance from Diane, every smirk from Nate, every too long stare from Elena piled on top of me, pressing me deeper into the role of outsider, the uninvited guest they wanted to see unravel. The servers moved with quiet efficiency, delivering plates that looked like art: seared lamb, asparagus tips, sauces painted with precision. I picked up my fork, but the food tasted like ash in my mouth. I chewed, swallowed, went through the motions, but all I could feel was the weight of Diane's eyes and Elena's silence. By the time the main course was cleared, my body ached from holding myself so tightly together. The candles flickered, shadows danced across the walls, and still Diane's smile gleamed sharp across the table. My heart pounded, telling me the truth I didn't want to admit. This wasn't the storm. This was only the wind picking up before it hit. The dining room felt too perfect, too orchestrated, as if every candle and every polished crystal had been placed not to create beauty, but to trap me under its glare. The chandeliers dripped with light, scattering gold across the oak table, while outside the windows the Austin hills loomed dark and heavy, silent witnesses to what was about to happen. Forks clinked gently, muted conversations buzzed, and yet I could sense it, the anticipation curling at the edges of the air like smoke. Then Diane rose. She didn't need to raise her voice. Just the scrape of her chair against the floor silenced the room. She stood poised in candlelight, her gown shimmering like liquid steel, one manicured hand resting on the back of her chair, the other holding a thick cream envelope. Even before she spoke, the tension in my chest tightened into a knot. "Since we're all among friends tonight," she said, her voice smooth, practiced, every syllable slicing neatly through the hush. "I think it's only right to share some family business." A hush deeper than silence settled over the table. A server froze mid-step, the silver tray trembling almost imperceptibly. I felt my palms grow damp, pressing against the velvet of my dress. I knew whatever came next was not meant for celebration. It was meant for destruction. With slow precision, Diane pulled out the papers, spreading them across the white linen as if she were unveiling a crown jewel. The candle flames caught the edges, flickering against her sharp smile. "My late husband was many things," she continued, her gaze sweeping the table. "But above all, he was practical. He left behind a will, and tonight I want to make it clear where his legacy belongs." I could feel every beat of my pulse hammering in my throat. My nails dug into my palm beneath the table. Her voice rang clear as she gestured toward Nate, lounging smugly beside her, his champagne glass dangling like a prop. The estate, the assets, every piece of his world, entrusted to me and my son, his blood, his true family. The words detonated in the room. Gasps erupted like sparks catching on dry tinder. Around 50 jeweled necks craned toward the papers, glittering earrings trembling as whispers shot down the table. Is it real? She gets everything? What about Lena? My stomach plunged. My lungs felt carved hollow. With a single forged document, Diane had erased me. Her eyes locked on mine then, her smirk blooming like a wound. She leaned forward slightly, savoring the silence she commanded. You're just a barmaid chasing a dead man's protest songs. Nobody will ever take you seriously, Lena. The words pierced deeper than any blade. My ears roared with blood, the room around me blurring into streaks of gold and shadow. Heat surged to my face as though every candle had been lit solely to expose me, burn me. Laughter trickled down the table, quiet but cutting. The kind of laughter meant to remind me how small I was. I gripped my purse under the table, desperate for something solid. My fingers brushed the edge of Dad's vinyl record, the cardboard sleeve worn soft from years of his hands. The record he'd played late at night, singing words of rebellion he never dared shout in daylight. The one I had carried into this glittering cage as my last tether to him. I dug my nails into it until the sting anchored me in the storm. She's stealing Dad's legacy. How dare she mock his songs? When I finally raised my eyes, Diane's smirk was still there, triumphant, cruel. Caleb sat rigid beside me, his face pale, his jaw clenched tight. His hand twitched on the tablecloth as if he wanted to reach across and pull me out, but in front of all those eyes he stayed frozen. The guests shifted, their diamonds winking in the candlelight, their whispers like a hive of bees circling my head. Some looked at me with a flicker of pity, but most with the cold fascination of people watching a spectacle, the fall of a girl who never belonged. Diane swirled her wine lazily, her voice dripping with satisfaction. Really, Lena? Dreams don't pay bills. Songs don't rewrite wills. Maybe it's time you stopped embarrassing yourself. The humiliation rose up so thick I could barely breathe. My throat locked, my chest ached. For a moment I thought I might shatter under their stares. But then Dad's voice, scratchy and unpolished, echoed in my mind. Never let them silence you. My fingers clenched the vinyl tighter. The rough edge pressed into my skin, reminding me I wasn't just some guest at Diane's table. I was his daughter. I carried his voice, his fight, his truth. I drew a shaky breath, forcing it into something sharp. My voice trembled but cut through the hush. You don't define me, Diane. It wasn't loud, it wasn't grand, but it was steady. And for the briefest moment, Diane's smirk faltered. Just a flicker, just enough to see that even she hadn't expected me to fight back. She masked it quickly with another sip of wine, but I'd caught the crack in her armor. The room buzzed again, cautious chatter picking back up, guests pretending to turn back to their plates but still glancing my way. My humiliation hadn't vanished. It still burned hot and raw, but beneath it defiance sparked, glowing stubbornly against the dark. Inside my mind, the words from that letter blazed like fire. Hidden assets. Diane thought she'd buried me with her forged will and her polished lies. But she hadn't buried me. She'd lit the match. I sat there, trembling hand clutching Dad's vinyl under the table, heart battered but unbroken, and I realized Diane had tried to write me out of the story. She had no idea she'd just written me in. The silence in the dining room was so heavy it pressed against my skin, thicker than the velvet curtains lining the windows. The chandeliers above trembled faintly with the air conditioning's hum, casting shards of light across crystal glasses and polished silverware. I could still hear Diane's voice echoing in my chest, barmaid chasing a dead man's protest songs, a wound disguised as words. But instead of burying me, it lit something I couldn't smother. My father's songs weren't just noise. They were fight. They were fire. My hand slipped into my purse, trembling but certain, until my fingers brushed the rough cardboard sleeve of Dad's vinyl. I pulled it out and laid it gently on the linen before me. The candlelight caught the grooves, glinting like scars that refused to fade, his handwriting faint but unshakable across the corner. It wasn't just a record. It was proof that his voice still lived, even if Diane had tried to silence it. I rose. My chair scraped softly against the floor, but the sound echoed like a thunderclap in the frozen room. Dozens of jeweled eyes swung toward me, their curiosity sharpened to knives. My pulse hammered so loudly I swore it shook the glassware, but when I spoke, my voice cut through with a clarity I didn't know I possessed. I read Dad's letter. Every fork, every glass, every breath stopped. Even the candles seemed to pause their flickering, and for the first time all night, Diane's smile cracked, the corners of her mouth twitching as if to recover control she was losing by the second. "He warned me," I continued, pressing my palm flat over the vinyl as if grounding myself. "He warned me about hidden assets, about signatures that weren't his, about a trust fund that disappeared before I was old enough to touch it." Gasps rippled down the long oak table. The Austin skyline beyond the windows loomed darker now, hills etched in shadows as if the night itself was listening. "Diane," I said louder, steadier, "you forged his name, you stole land, you evaded taxes, and you drained what little he wanted to leave me." A woman at the far end of the table dropped her knife, the clatter ringing like a gavel. Whispers surged. "Forgery? Tax fraud?" Crystal glasses trembled in unsteady hands, and one man muttered almost reverently, "She's accusing her of fraud." Nate shot up, his face blotched crimson, his voice cracking with rage. "You little—" "Save it, Nate," I snapped, slicing through his outburst. My voice, sharper than I expected, carried to every corner. "You've all laughed at me, dismissed me. But while you thought I was just slinging beers and scribbling in notebooks, I was working. I've been freelancing for Austin Soundwave these past months, collecting documents, interviews, evidence. Every detail of your mother's crimes is in my hands." The weight of those words crashed across the room like a storm breaking. Guests leaned back, startled, their glittering jewelry catching the candlelight as if even their wealth couldn't shield them from the truth. Diane's hand tightened around her wine glass, so tight I thought it might shatter against her manicured nails. Beside me, Caleb turned, his face pale, his eyes wide and searching. Betrayal flickered there, raw, cutting. He hadn't known. I hadn't told him, and it stung, slicing through me even as I forced myself to meet his gaze. This wasn't about protecting him. This was about ending her. Under the table, my phone buzzed softly against my palm. My thumb hovered for a heartbeat, then pressed send. My editor had everything. The article, the evidence, the story. In seconds, it would begin to spread, unstoppable, alive. "This is for Dad," I whispered under my breath, so low no one but me could hear it. "And for every family you crushed, Diane." Then I raised my chin, my voice steady, clear, defiant. "Those protest songs you mocked, they taught me to fight. And tonight, the world hears my voice." The air snapped like a live wire. Gasps erupted. A chair screeched against marble. Someone cried out. Nate stammered, fists clenched at his sides, but his words tangled in fury, impotent and broken. Diane's composure drained away, her face stiff and pale, her lips parted, her eyes narrowing with rage she could no longer disguise. "You think anyone will believe you? You think a bartender with a record collection has the power to ruin me?" I leaned forward, the vinyl firm beneath my hand, my voice cold. "I don't need power, Diane. I just need the truth, and it's already out there." Then across the table, movement caught my eye. Elena. She sat as calm as ever, her sleek black gown pooling like liquid midnight, but her eyes gleamed with something I hadn't seen before. She tilted her head just slightly, lips curling into a smirk, not cruel, not soft, knowing. It hit me like lightning. The anonymous tips, the quiet nudges that had led me to the right files, the breadcrumbs I'd followed into Diane's corruption. Elena. She had been the ghost in the machine, the hand guiding me just enough without revealing her face. And now, with a single smirk, she admitted it. She had chosen this exact moment, my moment, to let me see her. The realization was electric. Diane had thought she controlled every player in this room, but Elena had been watching, waiting, feeding me the very rope that now tightened around Diane's neck. The room held its breath. The candles flared. Beyond the glass, the Austin skyline loomed, dark and eternal, as though the city itself bore witness. Caleb's gaze burned into me, wounded but shifting, a mix of disbelief and dawning recognition. I could almost hear his thoughts. This wasn't the girl he thought needed saving. This was someone who had just set the empire aflame. My chest rose and fell. every breath shaking but resolute. For the first time all night, I wasn't reacting. I was leading. Diane's empire had cracks, and now they were spreading, visible to everyone. The air buzzed with shock and betrayal, but underneath it, a hum of something stronger began to grow. Defiance, justice, power. And as I stood there, Dad's vinyl beneath my hand, the truth already on its way into the world, I knew. Diane had tried to erase me from this story. Instead, she had just written me into its center. The morning after the gala didn't come gently, it slammed into me like a wave. My phone buzzed endlessly on the nightstand, the vibration rattling against the wood as if the whole city was demanding I wake up. Bleary-eyed, I reached for it, and the screen exploded with headlines. Austin Soundwave exclusive, heiress tied to land fraud scandal. Beneath it, photo after photo of Diane's glass tower surrounded by protesters, their handmade signs raised high. I scrolled with trembling fingers. Justice for families, not fortune for thieves. We won't be erased. Homes, not high-rises. The chants were so loud in the videos that I could almost hear them seeping through my apartment walls. And maybe I wasn't imagining it. When I turned my head toward the window, faint echoes drifted in with the rain. Voices carried down rain-slicked streets. The city council had already announced an emergency probe. Reporters camped outside Diane's gated estate. Her empire, so polished and untouchable the night before, was cracking in broad daylight. And I had lit the fuse. I should have felt triumphant, but instead my chest hollowed out, a strange heaviness pressing down on me. Victory tasted more like ash than champagne. I pressed the phone face down on the table, silencing its glow, and let the silence of my apartment take over. In the corner, Dad's old vinyl player waited, dusty but alive. I moved toward it slowly, my body leaden, and pulled the record from its sleeve. The cardboard was rough against my fingertips, the ink of his scrawled notes faded but familiar. With shaking hands, I lowered it onto the turntable. The crackle filled the room first, small sparks of sound that made my chest ache. Then his voice broke through, scratchy, imperfect, but strong. They build their towers tall, but we won't be shadows on their walls. That line shattered me. Tears streamed freely before I could stop them, slipping hot down my cheeks as I sank to my knees beside the player. His voice wasn't just singing, it was accusing, reminding, demanding. He had written those songs for people who had no power, for families erased by greed, the same families Diane had crushed beneath her deals. And what had I done all those years? Bartended, survived, looked the other way, too scared and too small to fight her. The guilt curled tight around my ribs. Yes, I had exposed her, but I whispered into my palms, I won, but at what cost? The empty apartment swallowed my words. I thought of Caleb then, his silence since the gala, the look in his eyes when I revealed everything. Shock, betrayal, something I couldn't name. He hadn't known. I hadn't trusted him enough to tell him, and now he was gone, unreachable. My throat closed as I whispered, why hasn't Caleb called? The vinyl spun, Dad's voice filling the space where his should have been. A sudden knock jolted me upright. My breath caught. It wasn't Caleb's steady rhythm. This knock was rapid, nervous. I opened the door and Tara stood there. Rain clung to her coat, dripping from her hair, her eyes darting like she expected Diane's shadows to leap from the hall. She stepped inside quickly, closing the door behind her with a sharp click. Her voice shook when she spoke. Lena, I leaked those documents. The words hit me so hard I thought I misheard. What? Her hands trembled as she pushed her hood back. The contracts, the files about the land grabs, the forged signatures, all of it. I gave them to you anonymously. I couldn't let Diane keep winning, but I was terrified she'd find out it was me. Her breath hitched. She ruins people. She ruins lives. I thought she'd destroy me if I was exposed. My heart stumbled. Tara, the woman I'd painted as cold, complicit, calculating, had been the one feeding me the truth? You risked it all for me? My voice cracked, disbelief spilling out with the question. Tears filled her eyes, and she didn't even try to hide them. I didn't do it for Diane. I didn't do it for Caleb. I did it because your dad believed in something better, and because I couldn't stand by anymore. Not when I had a chance to make it right. Relief hit me so hard I nearly collapsed. The weight of suspicion I had carried evaporated, replaced with something fragile, trembling, trust. I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around her, rain damp soaking through my sweater. "You don't know what this means," I whispered into her shoulder, her voice cracked against my ear. "I think I do." When she left, the apartment felt different, quieter, but no longer lonely. I walked to the window and pressed my palm against the cold glass. Rain streaked down in thin rivers, blurring the skyline into smeared watercolors of gold and gray. Somewhere downtown, chants still rose. Somewhere in those council chambers, Diane's lies were unraveling. On the table, Dad's letter sat folded inside the vinyl sleeve. I pulled it out and read the line I had skimmed before. Safe deposit box, trust fund, hidden assets. The words glowed like embers. The fight wasn't over. The story wasn't finished. And yet, as the record spun and rain tapped like a heartbeat against the glass, I let myself breathe for the first time in years. I had allies where I thought I had enemies. I had truth where I thought I only had grief. But still, one absence burned sharper than all the rest: Caleb's silence. The knock came just as the rain eased into a hush, leaving the night washed clean and trembling with silence. My heart jolted, then held still. That rhythm, I knew it. Steady, deliberate, unmistakable. For a long moment I stood frozen, palms pressed flat against the door, afraid that if I opened it, the silence we'd built between us would harden into something unbreakable. But then I turned the handle. Caleb stood there, rain clinging to his lashes, shadows etched deep under his eyes. His shoulders slumped like he'd been carrying weights for years. Yet his gaze, tired, searching, locked on me as if I were the only anchor left. "Lena," he said softly, his voice frayed at the edges, "I need to tell you something." I stepped aside, my breath caught between hope and dread. He crossed into the small apartment but didn't sit. Instead, he stood by the rain-streaked window, where the skyline bled amber light through thinning clouds. His hands curled into fists, then opened again like he was bracing for impact. "I found out tonight," he said, every word heavy, "that Diane, she funded my band." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. "What?" His jaw tightened. "She didn't believe in us. She wasn't investing in music. She was buying me, controlling me, making sure I stayed close, making sure I didn't question her. I thought we'd earned every gig, every opening act, every break. But all along, it was her strings." The ache in his voice cut deeper than any anger I'd held. He hadn't been my enemy. He'd been trapped, just like me. I whispered, barely audible, "She caged you, the same way she tried to erase me." He lifted his eyes to mine, raw and unguarded. "I should have trusted you. I should have known you weren't just chasing ghosts. But I let her pit us against each other. And I'm sorry, Lena." His voice cracked on the last word. Tears pressed at the back of my eyes. My throat ached with everything unsaid, every sharp word I'd swallowed. "We can't undo what she did," I murmured, "but we don't have to let her define what comes next." Neither of us moved for a beat, the quiet heavy with the possibility of breaking or mending. Then wordlessly, we left the apartment. The city was damp, the pavement shimmering beneath street lamps that glowed like watchful sentries. The air smelled of wet asphalt and cedar. We walked side by side, the silence between us no longer brittle, but fragile, waiting. By the time we reached Zilker Park, the clouds had drifted, leaving the sky stretched wide with stars. We climbed the hill where we once sprawled after a late gig, back when the world felt big and untouchable. I carried Dad's vinyl in my bag. It had become more than a record. It was the thread that bound me to truth, to him, to myself. On the damp grass, we spread a blanket and set the player down. The needle dropped, releasing the soft crackle of dust and time. Then Dad's voice, rough, defiant, achingly alive, rose into the night. His protest song wrapped around us, carried by the breeze, echoing against the Austin skyline that twinkled like 1,000 listening eyes. Caleb lay back, the damp earth cradling us both, his hand inching until our fingers brushed. That small touch, hesitant and trembling, carried more weight than any apology. "This," he whispered, eyes on the stars, "is what it should have been. Music without chains." I turned toward him, the heaviness in my chest loosening. "We start fresh," I said. "No secrets, no lies." He looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time in weeks his smile reached his eyes. "No secrets," he repeated, as if sealing a vow. The vinyl spun, Dad's voice weaving truth into the night. For a moment I let myself believe this could be enough, but then my phone buzzed against the blanket, sharp and insistent. I almost ignored it, unwilling to let the world intrude. Yet the caller ID froze me. It was the lawyer who had handled Dad's affairs. I answered, voice unsteady. "Hello?" His words came like a rush of light. The investigation had uncovered the safe deposit box mentioned in Dad's letter. Inside, untouched, was my trust fund. Every dollar Diane had tried to bury under forged papers. It was mine. For a long moment, the world blurred. My throat tightened, tears spilling hot and unashamed. Dad hadn't left me with nothing. Diane hadn't succeeded. When I lowered the phone, Caleb was watching me, concern etched across his face. I laughed through the tears, the sound shaking but free. "It's real. The trust fund. Dad's gift. It's been recovered." Relief washed through him like a tide, his shoulders sagging as though he'd been holding his breath all along. He pulled me into his arms and I let myself sink against him, the vinyl spinning Dad's voice beside us. "This is for him," I whispered into his shoulder, voice trembling. "For every family she crushed, and for us." He drew back just enough to hold my gaze. "We're free, Lena. Together." We lay back on the damp grass, our fingers entwined, the skyline glowing around us. And in that quiet, I realized something deeper than victory. My worth had never been tied to Diane's lies, or to the inheritance she tried to erase. My worth lived in the fight I had carried, the voice I had reclaimed, the scars that stitched me stronger. Dad's song carried into the starlit night, defiant and unbroken. And for the first time, I believed I could be too. 6 months later, Austin feels like a city reborn. The skyline is the same, yet it doesn't hold the same weight it once did. Diane's towers still rise above the streets, but they've lost their power, stripped of the shine that once blinded people into admiration. The headlines that used to exalt her now brand her downfall in bold black letters. "Real estate heiress, indicted for fraud. Ashcroft empire collapses amid scandal." I see those words crawl across cafe televisions, flicker from news tickers in airports, and whisper from folded newspapers left behind on bus seats. Sometimes I walk past her once grand high-rise, the glass doors locked, the marble floors abandoned, and I feel a strange stillness there. Justice doesn't always roar, it lingers in ruins. And in those ruins, I discovered my fire. I'm no longer the girl scraping together tips in a dimly lit bar, wondering if I'd ever escape her shadow. Now, I'm a staff writer at Austin Soundwave. My workspace may be a cubicle littered with coffee stains, sticky notes, and crumpled drafts, but my words stretch beyond its gray walls. Each sentence I craft echoes into lives Diane once silenced. Each story I tell carries the pulse of music and the demand for justice, braided together in ways I once thought were impossible. Every Thursday evening, I sit in a studio barely bigger than a closet. The foam panels on the walls are uneven, the microphone crackles if I lean too close, and the faint hum of an old air conditioner sneaks into every recording. But none of that matters. When I drop the needle on Dad's vinyl to open each episode, the crackle before his voice rises feels like a blessing, a reminder. His song, raspy, raw, defiant, becomes the heartbeat of my podcast. From there, I speak. We talk about protest songs that shook governments, about garage bands singing for their neighborhoods, about artists who refuse to let power dictate their sound. We talk about how music survives greed, how it transforms grief into fire. Listeners write in, telling me they play Dad's intro before marching, before speaking out, before daring to believe their voices matter. That's when I know. His voice didn't die with him, and neither did mine. Home doesn't feel like borrowed space anymore. It feels earned. Caleb and I share a loft in South Austin, just above a street that smells of smoky brisket, fried tortillas, and the sweet cinnamon of late-night churros. On weekends, laughter rises from food truck patios, guitars strum from open windows, and the neon glow spills into our home like restless stars. Inside, fairy lights dangle in uneven strands across exposed brick, glowing soft and golden against stacks of vinyl that lean like old friends. The air carries the warmth of roasted coffee in the mornings and the faint musk of cedar from handmade shelves Caleb built himself. His guitar rests by the wide window, not as a weapon Diane once bankrolled, but as his, untethered, unbought, free. Some nights we sprawl across blankets on the hardwood, Dad's vinyl spinning low. The faint scratch of the needle blends with Caleb's guitar, his fingers brushing strings in rhythms softer than breath. I sit cross-legged, pen in hand, scribbling notes for my next article, letting his music weave into my words. We don't always need to talk. Silence itself has become a kind of song between us. It isn't brittle anymore. It's whole, filling the space with trust and the quiet knowing that we survived Diane's storm together. One evening, I stood barefoot at the loft's window. Outside, tires hissed across damp asphalt, and laughter floated up from the taco trucks. My reflection looked back at me, framed in fairy lights, eyes lit with something fierce. I saw a woman with scars, but not defeated. I saw fire where there used to be fear. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one clutching her father's vinyl like a lifeline, her knuckles white, her whole body trembling at Diane's smirk. That girl never imagined she'd stand this steady, this free. Diane tried to bury me, but I found my fire. Her betrayal carved a truth I carry everywhere. Worth is not granted, inherited, or bought. It isn't forged on paper or locked in a vault. Worth is claimed over and over, even when your hands shake. It's in the way you rise when the world knocks you down. It's in the scars you refuse to hide. It's in protest songs shouted off-key at rallies, in whispered confessions on quiet nights, in stories passed hand to hand until silence has no chance to win. That night, Caleb came behind me, wrapping his arm around my waist. His warmth pressed against my back as neon buzzed outside. "I like this life," he said softly. Like if he spoke louder, the spell might break. "So do I whispered, steady as my heartbeat. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the floor to collapse beneath me. I felt rooted, alive, free. And now, with Dad's vinyl still spinning in the background, I want to turn to you. Yes, you, listening, maybe clutching your own story tight, afraid no one will hear it, afraid it's too messy or too painful to matter. I know that weight. I lived it. I thought my scars meant I wasn't enough. I thought silence was safety, but I learned that scars are not shame. They're proof you endured. They're proof you're still here. So let me ask you something. Don't keep the answer locked inside. Say it, share it, claim it. When did you prove someone wrong about your worth? Drop your story below. I'm listening, because your voice matters, just like my dad's did, just like mine finally does. And maybe, if enough of us raise our voices together, they'll grow into something louder than every lie meant to silence us. Maybe they'll grow into fire,